Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Teaching Excellence. My name is Augie Grant. I have the pleasure of being director of this marvelous facility and the provider of all of the drinks and snacks. So please make sure, I have a simple philosophy. If I can't provide food for thought, at least I provide food. So it's a pleasure to have you here. We are involved in many things at this university. One of the adventures that I'm actually involved in outside of this is in academic innovation, trying to figure out what this university is going to be like in 30 years. And one of the things that not only this university, but every university worldwide is going to be more international as time goes by. The fact that you're here today is a recognition of that you recognize how important it is not only to know your subject matter, but to know how to connect with the people in your class and deliver the content most effectively. So I don't want to take anything away from today's presentation, but I do want to give a good introduction to your presenters. Ann Janosik is, close? Mm-hmm. Ann is an instructor in the English program for internationals. For the last 22 years, she has been teaching international students English and teaching faculty how to work with international students. When it comes to issues of that transcend language, culture, how to do presentations, there's nobody on the campus that has more experience at this and more dedication to this simple thing that we've got to be more effective communicators if we're going to be effective teachers. With her today is Alisha Biler. She's the Assistant Academic Director for Graduate Studies in the International Accelerator Program. She got her degree, PhD in linguistics here from USC. In fact, we were just talking about her advisor, Stan Dubinsky, a few minutes ago, and joined the staff of USC again to help us further our mission. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to share a most fascinating 70 minutes with you.
Thank you so much.
You're both mine, so I can put this down.
We welcome to all of you. We're looking forward to being with you today. Dr. Biler and I will be dividing this presentation. We're going to get you started with a little bit of activities that we'd like to use to get you thinking. And then we're going to proceed with me beginning the presentation. She will finish. And what we'd like to do is have everybody have one of these little white cards. If you don't have one, can you raise your hand? Thank you. What we'd like you to do is just hang on to this during the presentation. As questions come to your mind, please go ahead and jot them down. And then at the end, we will collect all questions, and we will have some discussion at that time.
Great. So to get us started, we thought it would be good just to get your minds wrapped around this topic and thinking about international students. So what we'd like you to do is just turn to the person sitting next to you or behind you in groups of 2 or 3 and just sort of talk about what context do you teach in right now, what department, what type of classroom, and what are the current interactions you have with international students. So maybe it's problems you're having or things that are going well. We'd like to hear about successes too. And for those of you online, thank you. We're glad you guys are here as well. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we will get those at the end since you don't have a little white card. So why don't we take about 4 or 5 minutes just to share with the people around you about your experience teaching international students.
Here again. Thank you for sharing.
Whether or not I should
it looks like you all
substitute,
could have
but
gone
it's
on
so
and on for
substantive
like 20 minutes, and that's wonderful because I was hearing some great ideas, and that's very beneficial. I'd like to move on, though, and I'd like to first say, here are some of our beautiful students from all over the world that are here with us. They really enrich our lives. They enrich our university. And we'd like to talk today about ways to incorporate them better into our classroom and meet their needs better. Here's a nice breakdown from International Student Services of what we have this year here at Carolina. We have 1,892 international students from 97 countries. 654 of those are new this year. We have various majors. You can see we've got the 5 most popular. That's a little small. The most popular: chemistry, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, electrical engineering, and computer science. And you can see that we've got a range of programs here in which these students are enrolled. Graduate level is still the largest at this point, 854. How many of you are teaching on the graduate level? Okay. Undergraduate, how many of you are there? We've got 192 exchange students. We've got 140 in the International Accelerator Program, which is part of what Dr. Biler directs. And then we've got 111 at English programs for internationals. So these are the folks that are sitting in your classroom. Here's a breakdown of their nationalities in a way that's easy to see. Which country do we see the most of? We see a lot of China. We see 25% from South and East Asia, 15% from the Middle East, 11% from Europe, and then a smaller breakdown as well. We've had a lot of growth, which is a wonderful thing for our university. We're glad to see this. You can see that there's been quite a tremendous increase from 2013 to 2018, and we're still growing. And we're very happy that that is the case. The top 10 countries of origin with numbers of students right now, 708 from China, 132 from India. So right away, you know what? A lot of your students are probably going to be Chinese. How many of you have Chinese students in your class? How many of you have students from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh in your classes? From the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq? Okay. Well, we have a lot of wonderful students, but it's a change for us. We're having to develop new paradigms, new ways of thinking, new ways of presenting in order to meet the needs of these lovely new students. So there are some perceived problems. Sometimes we can experience a little bit of frustration in knowing how to meet these needs. If you read articles in which professors have been interviewed, sometimes they highlight a lack of participation. Sometimes they highlight a lack of communication, going both ways. They've also highlighted classroom integration. Some of us were talking during the discussion period, and I don't know about your classrooms, but in mine, I'll often find that there's this nationality in this corner and this nationality in this corner. It's difficult. Integration with American students is a problem, and another problem is integration with faculty or getting them to interact with us. So let's talk about the first problem, lack of participation. I'm going to show you 3 statements and ask whether you would agree or disagree with these statements. These are from a study, and I'll show you the study in a moment. International students do not participate significantly in class. How many of you all would agree with that? You don't feel there's much participation in your classes? Okay. 50% of the professors interviewed at a particular college had this complaint. How about this quote? International students participate less than domestic students. Do you feel that that's true? Okay, roughly. Here's another one. International students participate as much as domestic students. What's interesting about these 3 quotes is the first one, at the college where the study was done, 50% of the faculty said this was true. 70% of the same faculty said the second was true. That's the perception of the faculty. The third one was what both international students and domestic students, Americans who were in the classroom with them, felt was the case. So it's interesting, there are some differences in perception. I'm going to tell you some results of a study done at Niagara College in Canada. And these are some of the study participants, just so you get to know them a little bit. At Niagara, they have Korean students. This is one of their major language groups. They have Indian students and Pakistani students, and that's well over 50% of their student body. So if you remember the chart we looked at, we're really skewed to China right now and to Asia. And then they're about 25% Chinese. This is an interesting chart. I'll highlight some of the key points for you. I'm not sure how clearly you can see it. This is a list of tasks. And the questions for the participants was, how do you feel international students perform on these tasks? Do you feel they perform well? These are the responses of the international students by number and by percentage. These are the responses of domestic students. This doesn't have any professor responses. So international students, how they see themselves, domestic students, how they see international students. And I think the first two are particularly interesting. Group work, in other words, when we put students together and they get to work in groups, 70% of the international students felt that they did a really good job on group work. 45% of the domestic students agreed. So there's a gap in perception. What's the implication of that? If our American students feel that international students don't interact as well, what is an implication for our classroom? They won't want to work together as much. So that's something we can work on. Second thing, oral presentations. 41% of international students felt they did a good job. 8% of domestic students felt international students did a good job. So again, there are some differences of perception, and yet we have these lovely students. We want to see them integrated, and we want to do what we can to address some of these issues. So here are some practical tips from some various writings of different people and some blogs. One is that to get international students more comfortable with participating, a time of reflection is really useful before the actual speaking in class. I don't know about you, but if I were in a class of 200 people, I would feel shy speaking up. And if I were studying in Saudi Arabia and trying to speak Arabic, I would be really shy about speaking up. So it's suggested that some time to reflect first before asking someone to just jump up in the middle of especially those big classrooms can be really useful. So if you've had the University 101 training, they do a lot of the think, pair, share activities. That's really nice. They give them a topic. They say, think about this, talk in pairs, and then we all share together. So that gives a little bit more time for thought. Small groups are very, very helpful. International students will be much happier, more confident in a small group. In fact, I would too. Again, I would participate much better in a little cluster of 5 than I would in a big group of 200. It's important to be aware of cultural styles. I think Alisha is going to talk more about that later. But remember that not all of our students come from cultures where they express their opinions in a class. It is not expected, and it may even be disrespectful. So these are things that are ingrained. So the better we can understand the cultural background of our students, the more sensitive we can be as we work with them. Another suggestion I found is preliminary topic involvement. Some time for students to consider or get involved with the topic before the actual class discussion. So for example, doing some writing or some brainstorming before the actual time of class when they're going to have a class discussion. I thought this suggestion was helpful, a flipped classroom setup. So that means letting students watch perhaps a video of the major content before they come to class and then have your discussion in class. That's really nice because a student who gets it quickly can watch and pick it up one time. A student who wants to feel really solid and may not feel comfortable can watch 3 times if they want. And then they're going to really feel ready to come and participate in class. A couple of things that I found interesting in looking especially at the Chinese culture is that they are used to avoiding conflict. So they will avoid anything where there's this sense of discussion or conflict in the classroom. That's very hard. Another thing is there's this great deal of respect to elders. So when I'm in my classroom, and I can't get, say, my Chinese students to participate, I have to bear in mind that sometimes what they are doing is silently showing me respect. So I have to remember that. It takes time. Another thing I read is that for many students from Asian countries, it's more important to save face than to clarify a point of confusion. They would rather sit quietly in our classes and not understand what we said than they would raise their hand and make it clear that they don't understand. So that's an important issue. Sometimes we ourselves can be aware of problems with our communication, we as professors. So here are some things that we can be sensitive of. One is idioms and slang. I know someone who's been living in Taiwan for about 12 or 14 years now. And in a conversation, I used the idiom, let's not kick the can down the road. Well, that's been in the news a lot. To me, that had automatic meaning. This person came back with, I have no idea what you're talking about. So this was an American, but the idiom just didn't communicate like it did for me. Another thing is pace. And both of these are so important. Over the years at EPI, I've taken lots of groups on field trips. And every time we set up a field trip, we talk to the people who will be presenting the field trip. We try to explain about our students. And of course, EPI students, they're not on the same level as your students. They're at a lower level studying. But we say, please be careful of your pace. Please be careful of idioms and slang. You need to really slow it down. And they say, oh, yes, we understand. We'll give you the best docent. This person is used to working with international groups. And I'll get in there, and they just right along and use lots of idiom and slang. And at the end, my students say, I didn't understand. So it doesn't come naturally for us. We have to really work at this and be alert. Another thing that can hinder classroom communication for us is a lack of visual support. We can do a lot with this. I know that a lot of professors are. I look sometimes with my students at the visual support, the PowerPoint printouts and things that their professors give them. But so many times, even a single word, if it's a key word, can be a real issue. So do make sure you're using your board, your document camera, your PowerPoints to really support what they need. This is interesting. I read about one professor teaching a philosophy class who loved to use clips of Seinfeld. Well, unfortunately, the international world is not familiar with Seinfeld. And clips and references to American humor and American shows just didn't carry any meaning and left those people in the dust. So we have to give some consideration to what we're assuming they know. I even used a reference to Cinderella in my class the other day, and after class I thought, now can I really be sure that everybody knew who Cinderella was? No, I can't. I should have checked, but I didn't. Humor, jokes, and sarcasm. Humor especially is one of the last things language learners use. It doesn't communicate, it doesn't carry, and in many cultures, professors don't speak this way. So you have to really be careful about that. And finally, I'm guilty of this. I don't know about you, but I can explain something very clearly and then say to my students very patiently, did you understand? And they all, of course, smile and say, yes, I understood. And I think, great, and I go on. And then later it's apparent that that wasn't the case. So avoid yes, no, check-in questions. One of my colleagues at EPI has a practice that I think is quite good. He will explain something, and then he'll ask for the students to say, okay, what do you remember from what I just said? What was the main point? And then he may keep pulling things out of the students. It gives them a chance to think again. Classroom integration, to get your students more integrated into what's happening with the American students, we want our classrooms to really feel welcoming. We want them to be places where our students walk in, they feel comfortable, and they feel confident. One thing is in dealing with group work, it's very useful to assign roles. I don't know if you do this, but if you've got students that come from cultures where they're not used to participating and interacting and having an opinion, to put them in a group and say, okay, now do this, can be really hard. But if you can say, all right, you're the leader, your job is to call on everyone with the question. You're the recorder, your job is to take notes. You're the reporter, you're going to report to the whole class what your group came up with. That's a simple example, but that means everybody knows their job, and when they sit down, they usually get started a lot better. Another thing is assignments in writing. If you can get assignments out to students in writing and not just verbally explain, that really is useful. Another thing is exemplars of work. This is something I always struggle to remember, but it's useful to give a good exemplar, a really great example of what you want, even what it needs to look like, and then an example of a bad one. And I've gotten better at giving examples of the good ones, but I need to give more examples of the bad ones because I've still gotten work that's nowhere close to what I gave in the demonstration, and they said, but I followed your example exactly. So I need to keep working at that. Diverse discussion groups was one great idea I came across. The idea of especially putting students in mixed groups. So I think some of us in the hospitality management class, we were talking about that beforehand, saying that that's a really great way to break up the tendency of students to sit with their nationalities. So organize them into diverse groups. And another suggestion I read that I thought was quite good is keep those groups through the term so that they get to know each other's names and they actually build a little community. And again, that's going to build some confidence. It's going to make our students a little bit more integrated with each other. To make them welcoming, again, in our classrooms, it helps to use non-American names on tests and in all kinds of material. It's helpful to use student names in our classes as much as possible. It's helpful to make sure that our students have explicitly stated expectations. So I come out right away in my classes and say, I want you to talk. I'll make a big deal. Again, I'm teaching one level under you. I'll make a big deal of the fact that it is smart students that ask questions. I, to this day, remember a class in graduate school many years ago when on the second or third day of class, someone asked a question and the professor said, that's a stupid question. I promise you, I never opened my mouth the entire term, and I'm an American. So I like to explicitly say, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, you're wonderful if you do that, this is the way our culture works. So that's very, very useful. Another problem that often comes up is that when our students from America come to the university, it's a natural time to build relationships. They build relationships and connections that are going to last their entire lives. It's so important for their social lives, their business lives, and everything. And yet our students from the international countries find it very difficult to integrate in with American students. Have three interesting visuals here from a book published by a Chinese woman who lived in Germany for, I believe, about 14 years. And she created a series of diagrams demonstrating the difference between German culture and American culture. And I'm just going to show you a couple of these. This one is about interpersonal connections. What would be your observations about the difference between interpersonal connections in the German culture and interpersonal connections in the Chinese culture? Do you have any observations? What comes to mind? What do you notice?
The Germans seem very austere.
Austere, I love that word. Okay, they've got these limited relationships.
I noticed that it's very sequestered. There's relationships that don't necessarily touch. You have one set of friend groups, maybe another set of friend groups that don't interact.
Very true. And what's true over here?
It's complicated, but that doesn't mean East Asians know everybody. It's more like everybody is connected to some part. So if I say something to this person could influence the others that will later on influence me. So in that sense, that all the relationship is connected some way that I don't even know.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. I spoke to one colleague who's from Taiwan, and her comment was, you know, when I got married, I married my husband's family. And my mother-in-law and father-in-law have a right to decide with me how many children I will have. Okay, so, you know, that doesn't quite work that way in America, but she was talking about all these interrelationships and how important they were. Here's another. What do you notice about lifestyle? Yeah.
I think the German lifestyle is much easier compared to whatever the relationship is in there, like Asian or Chinese. I believe it's not just in China, but also in Korea, which is kind of, you enjoy a lot of resources from being connected to basically everyone, but you also bear the burden that everyone has to, you know, try to benefit from this relationship.
That's great. Thank you. I'll go on then. Just, this is very American too. The rugged individualist. We do everything alone. And this is very much connected. And again, here at a party, the German versus the American. Very indicative, very interesting. So one of the things that we can do to help our students integrate with American students is to make American students more interested in integrating with international students. And one of the things that we can point out is that business and life of the future is going to be very interconnected. Almost anybody who's going into business is going to be interacting with people from all over the world, and they can start that right now. They can start building relationships with people from all over the world. So teaching that value is a wonderful thing for our students, and giving them opportunities for friendships as well as they start to work in small groups. Again, I like that idea of keeping those small groups over time, allowing them to build relationships. My students are often disappointed that they don't develop friendships in their chemistry class, in their math class. And they don't understand that that's not usually where American students build them. So the more we can build something, the better they will integrate with other American students. Finally, there can be a problem of integration with the faculty, of interaction. So I don't know about you, but I'll always display my office hours, explain my office hours, and I'm usually very lonely during my office hours. So here's one professor's suggestion. He has a map. He has a lot of Chinese students, so he has a map of China up in his office, and whenever a new student comes in, he specifically says, come and show me where your hometown is and tell me about your home city. I thought that was wonderful. He can use pictures to get to know people. I love that Blackboard photo roster. I survive by that photo roster. It's very, very useful. Another thing a colleague does that I know is at the beginning of the term, she gives them colored index cards and asks them to take them home and creatively do something to teach her about them. And then she uses them all through the term, and she has a head start. She knows about their interests and what they like and they don't like. Some additional suggestions: make sure you know about the world views of the different cultures. Give an office hours assignment. Give 10 points for coming in during office hours and seeing the professor. Make sure you're having individual conferences with your students. I get halfway through the term, and I realize I'm halfway through the term, and I haven't met individually with a lot of my students. Small group lunches is a nice idea if you want to have students sign up, especially if you've got a big class. And one solution that I thought was quite good to communication problems is that after a meeting, send the student a follow-up email. I think just like you often would in business. Follow up with a summary of what you talked about and what was said. So I have finished looking with you at 5 perceived lacks, 5 areas of problems. And Dr. Biler is going to be coming up and sharing with you further about ways to enhance our communication.
Yes, so she gave some really great problems. And we do want to stress, too, you know, that it's not just international students that are having problems in your classes, right? But I think that these are some really great tips of things that we can do. And then hopefully some other ones, the next 5, are going to give you some more active things that you can do in your classes. So one of the ones that I think is most important, and Ann sort of touched on it, is this idea of knowing your expectations. Okay? Is everyone kind of familiar with the cultural iceberg model? Right? It's used pretty popularly. Usually we use it to talk about students' actions, right? The stuff above the water is the behaviors the students are exhibiting, and then what's under the water, what's not verbally expressed, is the why. It's sort of what's causing them to do that. Okay, but I'd like to flip it a little bit and also talk about your expectations. Because there are things that you say to students that you want them to do or you expect them to do, but you have your own set of expectations that maybe you're not even aware of that you're projecting onto your students. Okay, so the more that you can know how your culture is influencing how you teach and what you think of a student, it's going to help you to better reach your students in that sense. So for example, these are just kind of fun little things I like. So, you know, we say that proverbs teach us a lot about culture. And you've heard this saying in the US that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So the louder you are, then you get your problem solved, okay? Well, a Japanese proverb says, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, okay? So again, what you're expecting of a student, perhaps the one to be the loudest in the classroom, it may not be that student doesn't want to do that, okay, because of their own expectations. Okay, then there's one more. The early bird gets the worm, right? Be first, be early, be outstanding, okay? The leading bird is the first to get shot, okay? Now, I don't know, I don't know Chinese proverbs, okay? But what I found is that this is more like to be outstanding. Like if you stand out from the rest, you're gonna be there. So maybe some of our others in the audience can correct me if I'm wrong on this, right? But we're coming from 2 different expectation models, okay? And so it's important, one, that you know what you're valuing as a good student, and then you know that the students might be coming from somewhere else, right? So I'd like to pick up on where Ann left off with some of these pictures, okay? So what I think is really neat about this artist, I use these in my classrooms all the time, by the way, for speaking and for just getting students to talk and to talk about culture. But this one is personal for me. This is about making lines, okay? And when I lived in Turkey, I was very much this. Okay, so this is meant to represent kind of all of Western culture, right? And then this is all of East. Well, Turkey is very much this. You know, you go to a restaurant, and I would get so mad. I would leave personal space before the person in front of me, because I don't like to get too close, right? And people would just keep cutting in front of me, and I would get so angry, okay, until I learned to just put my elbows out and go. But it's this understanding that what I valued was first come, first serve, right? And you wait your turn. Okay, but that's not quite the model. They thought I wasn't ready. You know, I'm hanging back because I'm not ready. So something I think that's neat that I'd like to do for the next 3 slides is I'm going to let you talk about them in your groups. And so what do you observe from the picture? But then how does this relate to your classroom? Okay. So this one is just kind of funny, and mostly I'm just really still passionate about lines. But I also have noticed that sometimes when students come talk to me after class, they'll just cut in front of each other. And then, you know, they don't quite know this. Well, he was here first, I'm going to talk to him first. So I don't know, sometimes I've even caught myself just getting a little frustrated at the student who tries to cut because of my inherent cultural expectation of lines, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I've got 3 more. I'm just gonna put them up. I just want you to turn back to your small groups, just take 2 minutes, talk about the picture, and then how do you think that's gonna impact your students in the classroom, okay? So turn and talk with each other really quickly. One thing I want to point out about these is usually when I show my students this one, okay, my students from the Middle East or from Asia, they're like, yeah, look, we do that. Like it's sort of a bad thing. And I think what's important to know is that, especially how this artist is depicting it, there's not a better way, right? It's not that the red is better than the blue or blue is better than the red. It's just what we do and what we expect other people to do, right? And also keep in mind, we're talking about halves of the world, okay? When you boil it down to country, region of a country, individual with a unique personality, okay, we can't lump everybody together. But I think it's good, and most importantly, for us to know our expectations. And then we can start to learn more about our students, right? And then, of course, this one I always think of how teachers are viewed in the classroom, right? So, and students are going to give you a lot of respect. Okay. Again, it's not that Americans don't give their teachers respect. We just show it differently. Okay. Sometimes we don't. All right, it's true. But the point of this and the point of tip number 6 is just to know your own expectations. Okay. And then that leads us into tip number 7, which is how to avoid ambiguity. Okay. So this is obviously a picture of a. What do you see?
Rabbit.
How many people say it's a rabbit? How many people say it's a duck? Okay, it's obviously both, right? Have you seen this kind of famous picture? All right. Do you see how it can be a duck and a rabbit? This messes with your head a little bit. Okay? But this is what happens when you're ambiguous, when you have ambiguity. Okay, you're not really clear about how to do things. And so if your students are not getting clear expectations, they're going to be confused, and they're thinking they're doing the right thing. Okay? So how can we avoid this? Some practical tips, I think, would be to be explicit in a number of ways. So as Ann mentioned, in classroom behavior, tell them what you want from them. Make sure you give praise to good behaviors, but also tell them the why. All right? I think it's something really valuable to say, this is why I'd like you to discuss with your peers and not me to just give you information. Because I think it'll help students to see the value in it that they might not naturally see right away. Okay? Again, with instructions, make sure they're oral and written. I think that's really helpful. When you are trying to take an assessment, be mindful of some culture gaps. Okay? So I had a student the other day. He's in the sport management program here. He's like, man, all the questions on the test were about American football. And I was like, well, when you do a sport management program in the United States, you're going to have some football questions. So go watch the Super Bowl. I don't know. But I mean, so just being mindful, if you're not assessing their knowledge of football, maybe be careful how you're phrasing that question. So it's not getting in the way. And then I really like what Ann said about phrasing your questions in class when you're doing these check-ins. I'm a big offender of, does that make sense? That's the number one question I ask. And bless her heart, one student, it was like after 9 weeks, and a student was like, what does sense mean? Like, they had no idea what I was asking, and I just assumed, like, they all understood everything I said 100% of the time. Okay? So I think asking what questions do you have, or doing these exit tickets, kind of like the note card situation, if you let them be anonymous, it helps take that shame away of not knowing the answer to a question. And then also be explicit about academic integrity, which is going to be point number 8. We'll talk about how to handle that. But I think it's really important that in every class, students are being reminded that academic integrity is important and what it is. Okay? So that brings us to point number 8. Oh, just kidding. So strategies for professors to improve study experience. This is the study that Ann referenced, the study out of Canada. Okay? And so basically, this shows the international students, domestic students, and professors' response for what can the professor do to improve. Okay? So how can the professor take ambiguity out? And most international students, well, not most, but the highest response got improved student-teacher dialogue. But note, very few professors thought that that needed improving. Okay? So clarifying that ambiguity or building that relationship, international students see a need for it, whereas professors don't really see a need for that. Okay? We see an inverse relationship down here with making accommodations. We're going to talk about that one in tip 9 when we talk about grading. But very few international students seem to think they need help on a test. Okay, as opposed to almost 21% of professors, which I think is kind of interesting. So we'll look at a little bit more research into that as well. So dealing with academic integrity. Okay, this is an issue for all of our students, all right, unfortunately. It's something that we need to address as professors, right? So what are the best ways to do it? Just wanted to give you some background information about USC. This is done by the Academic Integrity Office. They gave us this data for 2017 to 2018. 9% of academic integrity cases involved international students, which our international student population at last year was 7% of our USC student body. So it's kind of right on par, but there are other institutions where the international students account for almost 50% of academic integrity violations. So I'd say this is a good number for us. And 33% of those students had more than one violation. So students who cheat once are tending to cheat again. And then I thought this was interesting too. Most violations from international students were about cheating on a test rather than plagiarism. Okay, so they're looking at cell phones or looking at tests, which I would have expected the other way around, but this is what they told us here. Now again, this doesn't mean that all things are being reported, right? So it could be a little different. So I was really interested in this topic, so I went in and I did a little bit of research, and I surveyed some of our students here just to see what they thought about academic integrity. So I surveyed international students and Americans, and basically I found that American students think everyone cheats. International students, domestic students. When I asked them, how often do you think other students are doing this? They said they're all doing it. Well, not all of them, but more of them did. International students think very few people cheat. They don't think international students cheat, and they really don't think Americans ever cheat. Okay? When I asked them what cheating offenses had they done in the last 12 months, Americans were more likely to say they worked on a group, even though the teacher told them not to. And internationals were more likely to say they used information without citing it. Okay? Interestingly, students do not admit that cheating is allowed or tolerated in their country. I think a lot of the narrative that I've heard before is that, well, things are just different, right? There's not plagiarism rules, and one friend who spent a number of years in China said, cheating is okay as long as you don't get caught, right? That's sort of the mentality. And my students are like, that's not true, okay? So they're saying that it's not that they don't understand this cultural difference necessarily. That's not the source of the problem. And it's not that they don't know what academic integrity is. This is 90% of international students say they're at least somewhat familiar with academic integrity. So that's good. We're explaining it, but I think we need to keep explaining it, okay? Because cheating is still happening, so we still need to figure out why. I asked them this question I thought was kind of interesting. Sorry, it's a little hard to see. But I said, which of the following do you most agree with? They could only pick one statement. Okay, the Americans are on the right, and the 61% chose the orange, which says, cheating is bad, but there's worse crimes in life. Okay, so that was what most Americans said. The most international students said cheating will have a negative impact on your future, and then 38% are red, and they say nobody cheats. Okay?
We didn't have any red on there.
Yeah, Americans, like I said, Americans think people cheat. So that's interesting. So it could be what they're willing to admit on a survey. It could be that they just have this different perspective, okay? But I think that either we're not agreeing on what the definition of cheating is, or there's just this big culture of not talking about it, okay? But something to think about what's going on in your students' minds, okay? Also, I asked them what are their comments on why do people cheat. International students, the most common words are the largest words here, so get good grades and to better understand. That's what international students said. That's why they cheat. If you look at Americans, you also see grades, but a bigger word you see there is lazy, okay? So the American perspective is people are cheating because they're lazy, all right, and that they don't want to put in the effort, okay? Which again, I don't know that this is for sure what every student is thinking, but it's something to keep in mind. It also doesn't excuse cheating just because they want good grades. I want to be very clear about that, but that's kind of in their mindset. So what do? One, I recommend getting at least one sample of in-class writing. Okay, have your students write in class. That way you know what your baseline is. Okay, so when they turn in a homework assignment later and it's way up here, you have some sort of grasp to say, hey, I don't know that that sounds like you, right? So I think that that is really very important. Okay. Thing number two, we have Safeassign on campus, okay, but how many of you have found that Safeassign has failed you in recent months? Okay, I have found papers that I knew were plagiarized, and Safeassign didn't catch them. Okay, so they're not perfect, and I learned at a conference recently, there's all these tricks about how to cheat turnitin.com. There's like these series of codes that you put in your paper. So anyways, be careful of that. So my advice is Googling. If you find a sentence, you take it and you put it into Google, and you see if it's there. But sometimes Google doesn't find everything, all right? So I prefer to use this site Baidu, which is the Chinese version of Google. I can find students' papers when I type it in here, okay? So sometimes Google does not find it. So my trick to you is sometimes search here if you think a student has not written what you think it is, okay? Also, another tip, too, is if you really think a student got extra help with a paper or something, you can just ask them and say, hey, can you tell me what this means? Or, you use this word. Can you tell me how did you look it up and how does it mean? It helps you kind of get a better understanding to see if they're doing it. And lastly, I would encourage you to take advantage of the Office of Academic Integrity. They're very good at recognizing what was just an honest mistake and what was sort of deliberate. And it kind of helps students to know the consequences of academic integrity. Okay, we're going to move really fastly so we can get to questions. So number 9, grade based on competency, not language. Okay. So the last thing we want is students to fail an engineering class because their English isn't good enough, but they understand the engineering concepts perfectly. All right. So this is something I don't know that many people have seen about writing. So you might get writing that to your students seems a little bit like it's not clear. The organization is off. Okay. It might be just because we as cultures have a different organizational strategy. So in English, we tell people what we're going to tell them, and then we tell them okay, right away. Which, if you look at the Asian languages, they start and they go around and around, and it takes a long time to get to the main point because you're kind of moving in slowly. Okay? So that's just sometimes the way to do it. Now, when I taught in English 102, obviously students couldn't turn papers like this, right? So we had to work on how to fix it. But this can hopefully give you some advantage of how to help students, so to speak. I would recommend the best thing to do is prepare students in advance. Let them know the rubric ahead of time. Let them do a peer review if it's some sort of writing assignment. That really helps them to see what their students, their peers are doing. And that gives them some idea if they've really misunderstood the directions. Keep focused on the objectives. If the grammatical and rhetorical errors can't interfere with the student understanding the assignment, then it's appropriate to take points off for that. But if it's just something that is minor relative to the knowledge they're showing, maybe consider how much it should impact the grade, right? But again, don't lower the standards, right? We want to keep you focused on the objectives for your class and making sure students are meeting those. And then as far as accommodations, remember very few students wanted accommodations on tests, which I thought was interesting. The same study asked them which accommodations they would like, all right? And basically, international students said they'd like a dictionary use in class, dictionary during a test, well, only 51%, and then lecture notes given before class. The rest are all pretty small, even though some of the professor remarks were different. But you can see here that 83% of professors said, yeah, dictionary in class, that's okay. That depends on your class, your assignment, your task. It really just depends on you. But mostly if you prepared the student in advance, they're going to be successful on the assessment. So lastly, know where to go for help. Okay, so you're not doing this alone on campus. There are lots of people here that are ready and willing to help you. So for example, my colleague in the back, Ray, he is going to be doing a presentation called Understanding and Meeting the Needs of Chinese Students in Your Classroom on April 9th. So that might be something that would be very good for you to do. When talking about those expectations, ISS does a regular Carolina intercultural training. So it's a pretty great resource. It's free for faculty, staff to join. There are lots of international offices on campus. So the office Ann works for, my office, the International Accelerator Program, and ISS. You can reach out to us at any time if you're having problems. All right? We're here to be a resource for you guys as well as the Center for Teaching Excellence. And then also the Writing Center. Never hesitate to direct students there. So that way they can get help with their essays there. Okay. We have a long list of references that we would be happy to email you on our handout. So if you're interested in getting the handout, can you please just put your email on that note card? Okay. We will be happy to email you those after this presentation is over. And I apologize, we're running a little late, but we've got 5 minutes left for any questions that you guys might have for us. So we would be happy to help answer more specific questions that you have in your classroom.